Hi, my name is Maggie Ingalls, and in this presentation, I will be sharing information about educational theorist Robert Maynard Hutchins, who is known for significantly shaping the educational theory of perennialism. The learning outcomes or overview of the presentation are, first, a brief overview of perennialism. Second, background on Robert Hutchins and his important educational endeavors. Third, Hutchins' central contributions to educational theory. Fourth, lasting impacts his thoughts have had on U.S. education. And finally, discussion questions. Before I get started with today's presentation, I'd like to start with the discussion questions. The first question that you should be thinking about during this presentation is, 1, in what major ways has Hutchins been influenced by Aristotle's theory or philosophy of realism, and where did he incorporate his own more contemporary ideas to help shape the educational theory of perennialism? And 2, what are the possible strengths you see to a perennialist education? In your opinion, what are some weaknesses? What aspects of Hutchins' contributions, if any, show up in your practice as an educator? This week in class, we've read about and discussed perennialism's implication on education in the U.S. To briefly review, perennialism is derived from the philosophy of realism and emphasizes an education that's universal. Perennialism argues that humans are rational by nature and that knowledge is universal and humans can come to knowledge through the act of reasoning. And the goal of a perennialist education is to keep the traditions and values of the historically dominant culture alive. As mentioned earlier, the educational theorist responsible for shaping many facets of perennialism is Robert Hutchins. So here's a timeline of some of Robert Hutchins' important educational endeavors. In 1899, Robert Hutchins was born in New York, and when he was 8 years old, he moved to Ohio with his family, where he studied at Oberlin, where his father taught. In 1925, he graduated from Yale Law, and in the same year, he also became a lecturer at Yale Law. By 1928, he had become the dean of Yale Law School. And in 1929, when he was just 30 years old, he was elected to be the president of the University of Chicago. In 1945, so from 1929 until 1945, Robert Hutchins served as the president of the University of Chicago, and in 1945, he became the chancellor for the University of Chicago before eventually resigning from the University of Chicago in 1951. So his administration at the University of Chicago spanned many significant historical events, including the Great Depression and World War II. And it was here that he really enacted many of his educational ideas and began endorsing changes to fit his personal campaign for American education. He took on a few other endeavors before his death in 1977, such as directing the Ford Foundation and chairing the foundation's Fund for the Republic. In addition, he initiated the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions. And although most of his life's work, as you can see from this timeline, was in higher education, many of his arguments on education can be applied to education as a whole. The next section of this presentation will cover Robert Hutchins' central contributions to educational theory, including his ideas on the purpose of education, knowledge, and the content of curriculum. A few years into his career at the University of Chicago, Hutchins wrote about the cause and effect nature of bewilderment. He claimed that humans have an innate desire to build knowledge that was largely being placed in obtaining fast facts. Hutchins argued that in memorizing and building fact knowledge without reasoning, humans became bewildered and lacked a genuine understanding of the facts that they were building. He questioned whether a wealth of facts would help humanity find its way, and he stated, "A university or school should be the center of rational thought. Certainly it is more than a storehouse of rapidly aging facts. It should be a stronghold of those who would insist on the exercise of reason. The gaze of the university or school should be turned towards ideas. By light of ideas, it may promote understanding of the nature of the world and man. It was in this realization and the note of the cause and effect relationship of bewilderment where Robert Hutchins' purpose of education came to light, which is cultivating human intellect through reasoning with ideas. Hutchins believed that knowledge is built through teaching the truth and that the truth everywhere is the same. Therefore, education everywhere should rely on the same principles, which is building knowledge through searching, discussion, and probing to build intellect and discovering the truth. It is important that schools educate students to build the same general knowledge for a few reasons. The first reason is that the search for the truth transcends any cultural implications. So if teachers are teaching effectively, the truth should be the same. And it is a disservice to transient students to be receiving different educations based on location. Additionally, students with strong intellect will be equipped to handle the higher cognitive demand of specialized learning or training for a specific career. He argued constructing knowledge in this way by stating, education cannot be made to carry the whole load of all of society's interests and needs. If it attempts to do this, it will fail and at the same time promote the atrophy of other institutions in the community. In other words, an education system that builds strong young students with important universal skills rather than incomplete training in specialized skills better prepares students for focused vocational training. Next, we are going to discuss Hutchins' contributions to the idea of what he believed the content of a perennial curriculum should contain. So Hutchins believed three things about curriculum. The first thing that he believed was that people need a general education. The second thing that he believed is a general education includes the study and discussion of the great thinkers of Western civilization. And the third thing that Hutchins believed is that the subjects of a general education are recurrent topics for each generation. So these three core beliefs helped him form his ideas of what should be involved in a perennial curriculum. So of these beliefs branched two important aspects of a perennial curriculum, the first of which is something called permanent studies, and included in those permanent studies are the great books. So according to Hutchins, a curriculum should be composed of something called permanent studies. These studies should reflect the common elements of human nature that we see universally. This connects with the idea that the quest for knowledge or truth is fundamentally the same and transcends cultural differences. For Hutchins, permanent studies should exist, particularly at the upper education levels in each school, regardless of student demographic. So this connects with the idea of, if we go back to the last slide, a general education includes the study and discussion of the great thinkers of Western civilization, connects with the idea that perennialism is trying to integrate the ideas of Western civilization, or what was considered the dominant civilization, into its students using these permanent studies and the great books. The idea of permanent studies was to ensure that education was persistent across all walks of life and to really push the values and ideas of what is considered to be the dominant culture. One way Hutchins proposed of implementing permanent studies was through the study of the great books. Hutchins believes that the great books embraced all areas of knowledge that were important to a general education. He believed that the study and discussion of these works would aid students in developing intellect and critical thought. He also advocated for study of grammar, rhetoric, logic, and mathematics as part of his permanent studies. He believed that these were the things necessary to a quality education. The great books were Western classics that were written by very popular Western philosophers such as Plato, Aristotle, Darwin, and Marx. He believed that there were a couple of benefits to reading and discussing the great books in a school setting and as part of a general education. One reason was because these books are considered primary sources rather than pre-digested textbooks, and the use of primary sources could aid students in encouraging thoughtful discussion through leading questions. Many ideas of perennialism have been met with criticism for trying to push culturally singular ideals, and some may see that as pushing one culture to be more valuable than others. For example, there's been controversy for failing to connect to modern life and enshrining white values on culturally diverse people by studying the great books. Even so, there are many perennial influences present in today's classrooms. One of the first ideals that's present in today's classrooms is text-based dialogue, or reading a text and producing dialogue to form thoughtful ideas based on a text. The second idea is the idea of general education, or studying general subjects in primary, intermediate, middle, and high school in order to prepare for more generalized study in college. A third perennial influence on present-day education is the use of critical thought and discussion in classrooms to form ideas and build meaning based on critical thinking. And finally, the use of a universal set of standards, such as the Common Core standards for the basis of American education, are the same throughout the country, which has a very perennial influence of having the same things taught in each school throughout the country. That is the end of our presentation today, so I will end with our discussion questions that I brought up at the beginning of the presentation. The first discussion question is, in what major ways has Hutchins been influenced by Aristotle's philosophy of realism? Where did he incorporate his own more contemporary ideas to help shape the educational theory of perennialism? And the second discussion question is, what are the possible strengths you see to a perennialist education? In your opinion, what are some weaknesses? What aspects of Hutchins' contributions, if any, show up in your practice as an educator? To learn more about Robert Hutchins, I recommend visiting these following resources, which I will paste down below in the comments as well. These are the references that were used to form this presentation and are very useful pieces of information on Robert Hutchins and his contributions to the perennialist educational theory. Thank you.